Hello everybody. Thanks for joining my stand here. I've been instructed I shouldn't be fidgeting too much. I'm being filmed, I have a microphone and everything, so I'll try and do that as hard as I can. Today I'm going to talk about BIM to you and to understand why I'm talking about that. A bit about me first. I work for Identity Consult as an associate as part of the project management team, but I'm also leading on building information modeling and the whole digital agenda for Identity Consult. So I act as a traditional project manager. I do BIM leader services, information management services, facilities management consulting, so it's quite a wide range, and I'll explain how these all work together. As part of the project control side, I am part of the Association for Project Management, which is very present here today, I found. And for those who wonder at my strange accent, because I do get that question in every conversation I have within the first 10 minutes, have French, have Austrian, international background at work as well, so now you know you can start wondering and actually focus on the presentation. So BIM, I'm going to go through what it is, what the foundations are to make it successful, and the role of project managers and project controls within that, and the emerging roles that have come out of it. Something's put, there we go. Someone's put it on automatic, there we go. So first, what is BIM? And I should say, you will find always at the bottom right of every screen some acronym busters, because as in construction, we love acronyms. BIM is even worse than normal construction. It's got lots more. So you've got a bit of a guide always to remember what the acronyms might be if I forget to tell you those anyway. So what is BIM? How many across the audience have, first of all, heard of BIM? And keep your hand up if you have. Perfect. How many of those who have their hand up actually believe they really understand it? Ah, you don't count, Paul, I know you do. So BIM, where it starts first. So with most of you having heard about that, I gathered, you know how it went in the construction industry. We had 2D drawings with lines where it's very much up to, and it keeps on going faster, where you had to really have an interpretation of, well, there's two lines, I guess that's a wall or not. You have separate documents, you have separate people working on separate plans, so really in terms of coordination and getting things right, quite hard. Then came technology that tried to improve on that, and you had softwares that allowed you to not only design in 3D, so allowing you to have sections, and I don't know what this keeps on, it's on pause, that allowed you to pick objects. So not only do you design in 3D with sections and elevations happening straight away, but you have actually objects. So if you pick a wall, you can pick a cavity wall, you can pick a block wall, you choose your component and the attached amount of data with it. So it's becoming something intelligent. And in terms of coordination, what you didn't have before is what's called model federation. So everybody has a separate model, but it's a bit like tracing paper, where the architect generally will lay out the sort of the basics of the building, and everybody will have their own tracing paper over that, which means every time the architect changes something, you can see that you can adapt it to your design and vice versa, rather than everybody having separate design in 2D, and you're not too sure if the architect ever changed anything, you continue design which may be not aligned. So the technology enabled a step change, but I have to say, careful, when I ask especially designers, do you do BIM? And they say, yes, I've got Revit, which most of you will have probably heard of as the probably biggest authoring software out there, one of the biggest certainly. Doing 3D modeling isn't doing BIM. BIM is really the process, not the software. So yes, having the 3D model at the core of it It is a cornerstone. Only that technology enabled this to be possible, but it's a technology that enables the process to work well. So you'd have all kinds of people, all kinds of processes around that 3D model. Because it's intelligent data, it knows a window shouldn't have a column in front of it. It knows that that's a problem if there's something in front of a window, or even worse, a door, if things go through each other. Because it knows it's a window, you can count how many windows, because it knows what window it is, you can get schedules automated, which means you can do a whole load of analysis, you can do a whole lot of sequencing, because you can link your program to it and sequence the 3D information to it. So there's a whole lot of intelligence around it, which allows every project member to work around it. It is not a design coordination tool. Yes, that's part of it, but that is what I hear much too often in tenders coming back from the designers on, yeah, it's great for design. Well, you need to make it work for everybody. So just clarifying, when I talk about BIM, so building information modeling, I generally talk about level 2, which is really the mandate since March 2016 for centrally procured government projects. So what that means is there are actually several levels of BIM, and when I talk about those 2D drawings that were separate from the documents and all of that, that is actually what's called BIM level 0. That was everything's separate, everything's uncoordinated, which is really the way we've known construction for a long time. Level 1 has appeared, and that's actually what a lot of people sell as they do BIM. They do some level of 3D modeling, but it's still not that single source of truth, that single source of coordination across the team. It's still a separate element, so you get the benefit of the visual side and people who are lay people who can actually understand what it is you're designing, but you don't get that full integration, that full knowledge behind it. Level 2 is then when you get that intellectual center with all of the data in one place, and you start pulling from everybody into that one place, so coordination becomes a lot easier. BIM level 3 exists out there in a way it's been defined by Digital Build Britain. The idea was to have an online platform where everybody designs at the same time online. Technology isn't there to make that happen, and even worse than that, I think our construction industry likes to point fingers a little bit too much at the time to allow this to happen, where everybody models at the same time. You would struggle to have an audit trail of who's responsible for what change and if something goes wrong. So I can imagine this would take quite a long time to happen. But the focus has tried to move into more portfolio side of things, where you make assets work for a whole portfolio of buildings rather than just a model and a building. So that's not really happening yet. It's roughly defined. They're continuing working on it. At the moment, the industry is very much working at getting level 2 right. And when I say BIM, I will always just say BIM, but I mean level 2. So BIM level 2, as I say, you can do lots of things with it. You can do sequencing, you can get costs straight away and things like that. But really, saying I want BIM as a client, you might as well say I want food. You'll have that awesome dinner in mind, and the architect will want to give you a pack of crackers. So really, you need to define what it is. If you're a housing developer who sells their houses, you don't care about asset information and about maintaining the building afterwards. So that's not something you would look for, and you'd concentrate on something different than a university. It's got lots of portfolios, and that is the crux of what they want out of it. Some people may not care about the costing element of it, whilst others do, and the same for everything, every analysis, every walkthrough, every technology around it. You have to define what users you want of it, and then the detail of, okay, even if I do want asset information, how much do I want? I certainly do not want to have the serial number of every light bulb and every light fitting, because who the hell is going to update that information? But that's exactly the problem, where you need to define what it is you want, and that's where we come to the foundation of BIM and making it work. So the first thing is understanding what it is that you need and defining what it is you want from your teams. So you should really be starting at your organizational level and how you work as an organization with your organizational information requirements, so loads of acronyms as you can see. What are your priorities as an organization? As I said, if you don't maintain your assets, then that's an easy one. So as part of the OIRs, you would define your asset information requirements, if there are any, and say, okay, well, I care only about the boilers, or I care about everything that's a maintainable asset, plus also all of the handles of the windows, because we have recurring problems with that. So you define exactly what you want, how much information you want. Do you want to know the manufacturer, the serial number, the color? Do you want to know the phone number of the manufacturer? You could go into any kind of level of detail about products. You need to define how much it is you want in terms of that. So once you know that, in the context of a project, that's where you define your employees' information requirements, which really, in terms of tool, are the exact same thing as you did with your employees' requirements in a contract. You define what it is you want. So as opposed to the traditional construction process, you need to make sure you define that right at the start, before the designer, not just before the contractor. And it's really the same as the scope of services. You would define, I want the model to be coordinated, I want the level of detail, so geometry and information to be at that stage, at that point of the project. Because the maturity across the industry isn't quite there yet, you have to define every single point. I have a lot of people say my EIRs are much too big and much too dense and too much information. However, I tend to pull them out at least once a month and say, yes, we did agree to that, remember that, and I've explained it in detail how it is to be delivered. So because of the maturity of the industry at the moment, it is all the more important to really go into quite a level of detail in those requirements and fix that before you go out to tender with the design team. The number of times that I've come into a project, for example, a university that said exactly that, I want food, I want BIM, that one line into the design team tender. And I've come into the project after they had done that, and they say, well, we've got a design team and they're all BIM ready, can you give us your opinion on them? And my first gut feel was, I don't have too good an impression so far, could you just give me what you sent them out and what they replied? So they sent out, I want BIM level 2, one line in the whole document, like, okay, well, difficult to argue in terms of what they've delivered, because they might want to give you that pack of crackers and they'd be really allowed to because you said food. And then I looked at the design team's response and it was all around, oh, it's a great design tool. Well, yes, it makes your design easier, but it's not a design tool. It's a tool to designing to make it work for everybody, and I clearly missed that boat and didn't understand that. So I have to come back to the client and say, well, the fact that you haven't defined anything and that you didn't understand what to look out for in the response at the tender makes it a bit of a culture change in the project at this stage. So once you've defined what you want, you make sure that it's in the contract. So the CAC protocol is the public document available free online where the legal clauses are written out. And that's a really crucial point. It's all good to have employees' information requirements spelled out, but if they're not included in the contract, well, you're never going to be able to impose them. But more than that, those legal clauses protect both sides of the family. So the client is protected because it forces people to actually share their data. They have to be putting their data out there for people to coordinate and to make this work, otherwise it wouldn't work. And on the flip side, those who produce the data, because it can be quite extensive. If you want every single piece of information about that light bulb, imagine the time it takes to model and input all of that data. People want their design protected. So there are clauses to do exactly that, saying you have to share your data. However, it is intellectual property that is just allowed to be used for this project, unless the client agrees something specifically and pays you for the reuse of it, which means the rest of the designers can't just pinch it and reuse it on their own projects. So really important to have that and have the EIR as an appendix to it. And then as another project where you'd have your project execution plan, you have a BIM execution plan. So it's all well and good to say, I want a coordinated model with that level of detail, but how often do you coordinate? How well? What software? Because technology has enabled that, but technology is also a problem at the same time, where what do you do when people use different softwares that don't work the same way? Which BIM tries to push for open formats. For those who have heard of IFC, Industry Foundation Classes, which is that format that tries to be the solution where that model can be used across any different platform, that has its issues with trying to be that cross-cutting. So there are difficulties with technology, there are difficulties with how far people are in the market, what they use, and that's where the BEP comes in place, and you have to try and define those processes early on. Otherwise, you ask, well, where's the result? And everybody looks around, well, I have no idea how to deliver that, and I haven't checked whether it worked with their software or yours. I've only checked it with that one. So you define all of this there the same way, really, that you do your processes as a project manager. So that really doesn't fundamentally change. You just add a little technology layer to it. I've started talking about challenges. So the first one, as always, the client knowledge is the big barrier where they don't know what to ask for. So they'll ask for BIM as they ask for food. Guys look at it, so I have no idea what they want, so I'll just put something there. Then you come into a project where if I come in and I'm like, okay, this is a BIM project and why hasn't everything happened? Well, they've put in place guys who, if it's a hospital project, the guys might be really, really good at the whole hospital side of things, and might have lots of experience in it, but they've never done a BIM project. They don't understand how that works, they don't know how to design in it, so they don't have the individual capability, as good as they are at their normal job, to deliver this particular project if it wasn't spelled out clearly at the start. And because industry maturity hasn't quite gotten there yet as well, a lot of companies haven't tried to embed it into their culture of, okay, how do I make it work well within me? They're trying to think, okay, well, how can I get away with it for the client? And they'll try and do just a bare minimum to make it work, but they wouldn't necessarily try and understand how this actually benefits them, which means it generally comes at a cost to them, which is trying to fob up to the client. And if that happens after you've employed them, well, they'll always come back, whether they make a gain or not, they will always come back for more money. And you've got the problem that they've already had priorities if you come in late. So you had to submit for planning. So everybody's already head down trying to get the planning drawings out, and you're like, well, how is the model going on? Oh yeah, well, we need to get planning out, we'll do BIM afterwards. And you just, well, how does that work? Because your drawings are from the model, you produce things from the model. How can you do BIM afterwards? It's the whole process of the information production to start with. So the culture problem and the fact that they have a milestone, they have a delivery in mind and struggle to shift is a real problem. And then you get a pissed off client who doesn't get what he thought he asked for. You've got a team that's just struggling hard to try and deliver something that's a moving target. So that is, unfortunately, a very, very common picture across the industry at this time. With the two polar opposite of the client not having enough knowledge at the start and the industry maturity where people try and just do with at the moment. So why this is relevant for this forum in the first place, because I'm talking a lot about technology and all of that, is actually there's a lot of new roles that come with it to make it work, which are relevant to that. So there's really three sort of sets of roles which are interlinked and overlap to some extent, at least the way I've spelling them out. So you've got the BIM leader who will try and define all of these requirements, will be the advisor, will be the one guiding so that everybody gets there. You've got model assurance, which there are a number of projects I've seen where the client told me, oh yeah, this is a BIM project. Okay, we are a month off handover. Have you ever seen and checked the model? No. So do you know what's happened already? No, well, I don't. Well, I might see at handover. Okay, what checks do you do at handover? Well, I don't know how to read a model to start with, so I don't know. So clients generally have no idea what to do with it. What we do as assurer is we do generally on a monthly basis, we check the quality, we check is it designed enough, is it coordinated, is all the right data there in the right format, have they exported it correctly? So do these checks, and really that's a project controls function of checking that things have happened when they should. And the information manager, again, comes well within that project control function where you go into the information exchange. So in terms of, I'll go back a little bit, model assurance, you would go in a whole lot of detail around the model and the asset data that comes out of it, including level of details. For those who've heard of it, COBE, which is a format for export of asset information into an Excel spreadsheet, really. So check that the information is in a usable format for the client at the end, if that's the format that they wanted, it's complete enough. Do stupid clash detection. So as you can see exactly when, and you've got software that shows it very quickly. If you've got something going through a door, that's clearly a problem. However, the software is only a software. If it tells you, well, actually, there's a pipe running through the floor, that's a problem. Well, it may or may not be like, well, I know there's going to be a hole. It's not rocket science. I'm happy to accept that. Whilst others, you may say, well, it's going through a fire partition. I want to know exactly what happens there and how you create that barrier at this point. So there is still, as with everything in BIM, you need the intelligence behind it and the skills and the human factor. So a lot of people think, oh, BIM, awesome. One click, you get everything sorted. No, one click, you get the legwork sorted. Then you bring in your intelligence, and that's where every role becomes more good use of people's intelligence rather than for the quantity surveyors, for example, they don't have to take out the rule measure all the time and measure everything manually. They get most of the quantities directly, and then they add their knowledge of, well, okay, if it's a 3-meter high wall, it's going to obviously cost more than a 2-meter high wall, and I apply that intelligence to it myself, but I don't have to spend days and days using my rule measure. That's automated now. So in terms of the information manager, you would find a common data environment, so an EDM or an online document platform or whatever you want to call it, according to the government guidance on BIM. It's now called a common data environment. So you find the online platform which is right for the project. It could be a Dropbox to a Viewpoint, a Connect type solution, which has lots of workflows. So you set it up depending on the project requirements, including, so workflows. Do you need an approval workflow saying once a file is updated in that folder, it goes to that person, they have 7 days to respond. If they haven't responded, it goes to the accepted folder. In all of these things, it can get very complex and automated depending on the project requirements. So as information manager, you would set that up. You would define the file naming. In BIM, it's very, very pushed to adapt the British standard so that there's a naming convention that works across everything, and you don't have to spend days looking for different files, different revisions. So it's all well structured, and standards are much more applied in the BIM world of things, really. In terms of training, you help obviously people understand the platform, use the platform right. That's still, the human factor is still the biggest thing of making sure that they know how to use it. A lot of people are dead set against those platforms, and I've had a meeting recently where it was a BIM kickoff for the meeting right at the start, and all the designers were sat on one side of the table and the consultant team on the other. And the designer was like, oh, well, common data environment, having to upload all our drawings, can we not just email them or not? At which I cringed a little bit. And my director who sat next to me said, well, actually, I had the same reaction to start with. And then I worked on a project with Nat, who had that in place because it was BIM Level 2 project, and she kicked me to start using it and understanding it, and actually I love it, and I really wouldn't want to go back to not using it. My best advocate ever, my director, on that point. And it's a change of way of working, but you can't exchange large models, large files continuously and coordinate if the information isn't available online. So as information manager, you are the gatekeeper to make sure it gets uploaded in the right place, the right name, so people can find it, the right revisions, so people stop wasting time searching for things. So this is where project managers and project control roles are really relevant, because we're there from the get-go normally. So we have the chance to define it correctly before people get in. We are the gatekeepers for the information exchange. We have the authority to act, especially as project managers. I have the authority to say, you haven't done your outputs as agreed, you're not getting paid. And I'm using it more and more because designers tend to say, oh, well, all of these clashes, all these problems, next time. I'm like, no, we've agreed that you're not doing it. It's not just the techie thing of the project, it drives the project. How can I rely on your drawings that you've sent the contractor if actually I can see loads of errors in the model? The drawings come from the model. That's not giving you any comfort. So you have that authority, you have that oversight, you have the client support to be able to enact on it. You're there up to until the end. So as information manager, again, really important, we're not relying on the contractor's document database to come once all of the design has already been developed. There is a common data environment in place from the get-go, ideally owned by the client, because that way, if they have a dispute with anybody, including ourselves as information managers, we go off the job, they still own the platform, they have the full audit, the information doesn't disappear. I do know a client where the contractor was the owner of the common data environment on the project, and they went bust and poof, everything disappeared. So I didn't have to tell them to apply this method of owning the common data environment. I said, no, we would never do anything different because of that lesson learned. And lastly, well, we're the person who's always there chasing people. We're always sitting there at meetings. We always talk to people. So as that figure that they keep on seeing, being able to deliver that role doesn't takes you out from being that techie and that side person that you can ignore except for once a month when you have the BIM meetings. You can understand the context of the project. So if there is a significant design change, that you understand that the model won't progress in that area or will have lots of issues, and you can just sideline that. Information exchange, you know exactly when the new program came out, and you can chase straight away. It's like, guys, I know there's a new program. Why isn't it on the common data environment? I'm not going to look in my emails to find your latest one. So having that knowledge, having that link, you can foster the collaborative attitude, which is a core element of BIM. The advantage of BIM is really you take out the legwork and you can create lots of efficiencies, which instead of just we spend less time on the project and we spend less money on it, we spend that time coordinating it better, we get rid of all the issues. So if you do your clash detection first, if you make sure your design works, your specifications are actually spot on, then you have a lot less rework on site, you have a lot of your users understand the space better and you don't have the same problems. So this is my spiel about why we're key to making BIM work in this industry, and we're key to overcome all of these obstacles that we have at the moment with the level of knowledge across this industry. Any questions?
Thank you. You've talked about challenges, but my question is really specifically around the integration of BIM and planning. What's the main challenge that you've encountered from your experience, and how has that been addressed? just regarding integrating BIM and planning?
So it's agreeing the level of detail that you go into that is the biggest challenge, because you could, as you can model in a lot of detail, the way planning and programming works is that you, every component in the object, you link it to your normal, whether it's ASTA or MS project, you just link it to those programs. So if you design lots of rebars, then you could link the rebars technically. That comes with the challenge of how detailed do you model, how do you manage that? And then the program happening only at construction stage, how detailed does the design team start to split their information before that, because they don't know how the contractor is going to proceed. So they will have a large floor slab for the full building. The contractor's like, well, I'm going to phase it into 4 slabs though. So you need to cut it in 4 slabs. Like, well, we're not going to rework all of this. So that transition, when the contractor comes in and takes over design, is really, really hard on saying, well, how do we use best this programming tool or this planning tool to make it work? And you have to make BIM work, you have to think about things much earlier in the project to make it work, but not everything's possible. The program is a good example of it's not possible to think in detail the construction sequencing, because that will depend on your contractor. So that's really the biggest challenge I can see.
What's your best example of the rollout of BIM and its benefit? Have you seen it go right through to facilities management and the benefit of that actually being realized?
So there's very, very few projects that have gotten to the facilities management side, and that's the infant bit of the BIM journey at the moment, where technology is still struggling. The facilities managers will often have, well, when they have more than an Excel sheet, which isn't always the case, they will have a computer-aided facilities management software, a CAFM system, which automates when they do their plant maintenance. So what format does that platform accept information in? I think there's 2 platforms that actually adopt models directly. The rest of them, you're lucky to find one that even adopts that Kobe spreadsheet, which is just a spreadsheet, to import that. So that handover is an immense difficulty at the moment, and a lot of software vendors are very close in terms of what they're willing to demonstrate. They say, oh yeah, we'll do you a demonstration based on slides. I'm like, no, I want to give you a model and show me that it actually works with my model, not nicely presented slides. That doesn't happen very often at the moment. Very few of them do. So that is a big problem. There is a problem that it's very rarely defined what people want to say. Oh yeah, well, I understand BIM, I want Kobe. Okay, you're telling me what format you want it in, but what data do you want in? It's like, oh, well, I want to know the manufacturer and the serial number. Okay, about what products, about what building elements. And that is a massive challenge for this industry and facilities managers to even understand the question. They've never been asked a question. They're always being given, there you go, there's your operations manual, sorted out your problem. Never ever been asked, what do you want in what formats? So that rarely happens. And then it's the usual where, because it's less understood at the moment, it's the one that's easily value engineered. So it's the same as the whole sustainable agenda. What's the first thing to go on a project when costs are cut? Well, BIM is along those lines where, we'll just cut out BIM. Well, that's a whole life cycle issue of you're losing out in the long term, but it's hard to tell a client you need to invest, obviously. Big changes though is in attitude. I found implementing BIM has helped a lot of people to communicate better and more transparently. It tends to be very much a fight, especially because I sit down on a monthly basis doing the assurance. And as a project manager, which is the good side, I'm not just sort of sending them a report and this is all you've done wrong and you're terrible. I say, well, there's 10,000 clashes here. First of all, I do need to report to the client, but I've always caveat saying, okay, well, your curtain wall is 2 centimeters too far in, that clashes with 250 components. You need to take it with a pinch of salt and numbers. But how many crucial areas do we have? What type of areas? Is it in the way you're modeling that's a problem? Can I help you be more efficient in the way you design? And having that open conversation around the table has actually created a much closer relationship across the team and has been a lot more open and transparent about issues we've had as well, saying, well, guys, what is happening with this area? Oh, we haven't looked at it yet. How have you not looked at it? We're sending out contract information right now. So it's that transparency, that ability to talk about things has been fantastic on projects where it's hard work getting there, but it does make a massive difference from normal projects.
Wonderful presentation. Just one question. I tend to work a lot with contractors who are at the downstream of a project cycle, but tend to have the biggest chunk of the money in a project.
Yeah.
So you talked about early start of BIM in the process, but I work with a lot of contractors who are willing at the downstream end to prepare a BIM model for their takeoffs, for their procurement purposes and their clash detection. Any experience, do you think, is it too late if the contractors can just get on board and do a BIM model for their construction purposes, ignoring the design and client at the upstream?
I know that happens still a lot of times. I know a contractor in particular who tend to model each and every one of the projects. It comes with projects that don't have the CAC protocol in place, and the designers who don't understand it tend to be still very precious about their models, say, well, I'm not sharing my model with you, what are you going to do with it? And I find contractors remodeling when it's already modeled, which is a waste of money across this industry, which is enormous. But a lot of contractors do that modeling, especially when it's 2D drawings, because it enables them to do that quantification much more quickly, much more efficiently. I've got contractors who do that even when they tender jobs, and they're like, oh, well, we've seen actually, we've done a very quick structural analysis, because drawing the model in little detail doesn't take that much time, and we've done a quick structural analysis, and actually to save $1 million on the project, just knock off that or add a column there, and it just takes off the weight, and there you go, bid with an actual value engineering proposal, which otherwise it would have been a nightmare to try and calculate that through. So it happens quite a lot. If it's for your construction purpose, yes. If it's for the wider purpose, it's a whole different question of the level of detail and accuracy that you will need to have. Modeling is actually really quick, and especially if you have already a full design there, you just follow the lines that are there. So it's really, it's not that big a challenge. The issue is when you started from scratch, it's always trying to think ahead of, okay, I'm not just using a wall, what kind of wall would I want to use, because the thickness is different and that'll affect the whole thing further down the line, and I don't want to do the rework. So it pushes you to think that ahead. But there's no problem for certain purposes in coming in late. If you want to do that for asset information in your specs and all of that, that's so much work at this stage. It's worth a discussion with the client if they decided they wanted it at that point. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much. I'll be around. I have one of those blinking lights from the stand at the front if you're trying to find me. And obviously with being dressed in red, I'm not hard to find. So thank you very much for coming to our presentation.